Welcome to Module 5 and the 279W Windows Server Administration class. I'm your instructor, Robert McMillen, and this module we're going to discuss managing printers. Our objectives for Module 5 are managing printer permissions, managing printers and print servers, sharing printers on a Windows network, printer pooling, and printer priority. By default, everyone with access to the network can print to a shared printer. This includes the guest account. However, this may not be what you want. So when you create a printer, or a print queue, as we also refer to it, it's basically the same thing. If you share that printer on the network with everyone else, then everyone's going to be able to print to it. You can change that, however. Printer permissions set the maximum allowed level for a printer. There are two different printer types of permission that are applied whenever someone tries to print. There are standard and there are special permissions. So under special permissions, you have the read permission, allows a user to view permissions assigned to the printer. Change permissions allows a user to change permissions assigned to that printer. And take ownership allows a user to take ownership of the printer, its print job, or both. So with these permissions, they are special permissions. They're generally not seen by the users themselves. They are set by the administrator. And you don't usually even need to set these permissions. The defaults that come on them allow the administrator full access. And you may not necessarily want everyone else to have this other type of access. Standard permissions is something that you'll be more likely to make changes when you create a printer or print queue. By default, everyone is going to who connects to the printer is going to be able to manage their own print jobs. That means if a print job gets stuck, they'll be able to cancel it, clear it, that kind of thing. Manage printers, a user has complete control over the printer and can set permissions. This is actually the highest permissions you can have under the standard permissions model. Manage documents is the second highest, and then print is the third. So manage documents, users can manage individual print jobs. So they can manage not just their own print jobs, but other people's print jobs. You may want to have the head of a department have that capability, so they're not always calling you when a print job gets stuck. So under the standard print permissions, you can see who has access to everything. So the creator owner can manage their own documents. Everyone has the ability to print, and the administrators and these other groups have access to do everything. So how to manage printer permissions? How to assign standard permissions, special, and ownership. Print server properties control the global settings for all printers configured on a workstation or server. Print server properties can be accessed by opening Print Management and choosing the File menu and then the Print Properties. You can configure settings for forms, ports, drivers, and advanced server settings. Let's take a look at that. So if we go to our printers, and let's go ahead and take a look at a printer that's already been created. We can right-click on that printer, and then we can go to Print Properties. Now we have multiple different printers here, so we'll just choose this particular one. Now we can see Print Properties shows everything that we want to see. If we wanted to go to this other one and just, instead of choosing printer properties, we just choose properties, we don't see everything we want to see. So when 2008 R2 came out, they got rid of right-clicking and going to the properties. You now have to go to the print properties to see all the different options. All right, so once we're in the print properties, we can do things such as sharing, ports, changing the driver, priority, that kind of thing. We can also choose color management, security, and this is what we're in right now in our presentation is security. So if you wanted to, you could go in and you could add particular people or groups, and you can give them whatever rights you want them to have. You can also take away rights using the deny right as well. And when you're done, you can click Apply. All right, under managing printer properties, the properties of each printer exposes a variety of configuration options, which I just showed you, depending on the printer driver. So every driver shows slightly different tabs than the ones I just showed you, but they all share the security tab, the general tab, and the sharing tab and the ports. Those are all there, but the additional tabs are all based on whether or not the driver supports it, such as you won't see color management on a printer that just prints black and white. So some of the things that you can configure on a printer are the printer name, the printer port used. That could be an Ethernet port or a printer port or even a USB port. The printer driver, the default paper size. So if you want it to go from something other than regular paper, you could have it say default to legal size. Additional printer options such as duplexing, envelope, and envelope printing are also printer options in the printer properties. So sharing printers, like folders, printers can also be shared on the network. The same type of share level permissions apply to printers as file shares. So it looks just like a file sharing. When you go to share a folder and when you go to share a printer, it's almost the exact same procedure. So let's go ahead and create a printer. We can choose the add printer button, and we're going to choose to add a local printer. So we can use an existing port such as LPT, COM ports, some of the older style ports. But nowadays, most of the time, we use standard TCP/IP port. And we'll give this one a name. We'll call it test printer. Now, it's going to look for the test printer. And we're going to say create a printer using generic network card. It's going to try to detect the model. And we can choose a print driver that's already there, or we can go ahead and add a disk if we have a disk, and we pop it in there at that time. So we'll just choose this Canon printer, it doesn't really matter. And then the printer name, we'll just leave as default. So it's installing the printer driver. And now our printer is just about complete. We're going to go in and we're going to change the port information because we realize that our port on our printer is not the port that we want. Here's where we set the sharing name, and we can leave it as default, or we can just go in and make it simple and just say Canon. And we're going to set it as the default printer. We're not going to print a test page because it is a fake print. There we go. So if we right click and we go to printer properties, we can see the port is not what we want. So we're going to add a new port. TCP/IP, new port. Next, we're going to give it an IP address, 10.0.0.200. And it's going to try to query the port, but of course it's not going to find it because it doesn't exist. And we're going to choose the generic network card once again and finish. Okay, so now we are using the 10.0.0.200 for our port. It's an IP address. We can click on configure. And if we want, we can change the port number. By default, it uses TCP 9100, but you can change that if you need to. RAW or LPR. LPR typically for Linux-based printers. RAW for Windows. That's not always the case, but we'll go ahead and click Apply. So here's our port. And if we wanted to, we could go in and change the print driver. If we don't like that particular one, we could choose a different one. And we'll go ahead and go back to our presentation and see what's next. Printer pooling allows for one logical printer to point to two or more physical printers. It allows for load balancing in a busy office. It does not have to be the same model of printer as the other printers in the pool, but it must use the same driver. So why would we use printer pooling? Well, it's very simple. So if you have, let's say, 3 printers that all can use the same HP LaserJet 4 printer driver. They may not all be LaserJet 4s, but they can all use the same driver for whatever particular reason. Let's say you have 3 printers, but you only want to have one shared print queue. Well, you can turn on printer pooling to allow that one printer to load balance between the 3 printers. So if one printer is busy and somebody else sends a print job to it, the office won't have to wait because it'll just jump to the next printer. And then if 2 printers are busy at the same time, it'll jump to the 3rd printer. So it's a great time saver for a very busy office. So in order to enable print pooling, you want to check the box that says Enable Print Pooling. And from there, we can add another port. And this will be 10.0.0.100. We choose our generic card and finish. Click Close. And now, look, we can choose multiple IP address ports. So now we just enabled printer pooling. So if we uncheck this box, we get an error. It says, hey, you can only, if you don't have printer pooling turned on, you can only select one port at a time. So if I switch around, it won't allow me multiple selections. I turn it back on. Now I can select more than one. So that's printer pooling. Print priority is the exact opposite of printer pooling. So before we had multiple physical printers, but one logical printer. So now we've got multiple logical printers, but one physical printer. This is to be used in an office where they don't have a lot of resources. Maybe they only have one printer and it's busy all the time. So you can create 2 print queues, which you'll be doing in your lab. So you'll create, we'll just uncheck that, click Close. So you'll create 2 of these particular printers side by side, but you're going to change the priority. So you right click, you go to Printer Properties, and then you go to Advanced, and you go to Priority. So if I change number 1 to number 2, and then I go to Security, and I remove everyone, and I add in just let's say the accounting group. So if I add the accounting group in there, and they have priority 2, and then I create another printer, and I give it priority 1, then priority 1 is going to be able to print before priority 2 does. So I can have the executives give them permission to the first printer with priority 1, and I can have the accountants print to the second printer with priority 2. So if they both send a print job at the same time, the executives will get through before the accountants do. So that sort of helps out offices where they don't have a lot of printers, a lot of printer or resources, but they have multiple people trying to print at the same time. So in conclusion, we discussed managing printers and print servers, printer permissions, sharing printers, pooling, and print priority. And that concludes our Module 5 presentation.